the overview, there is an acknowledgement basically that newsrooms are undergoing massive transformations due to computational journalism, and well, of the argument that algorithms and AI as examples of computational journalism are shaping both journalism and public life. There is also an acknowledgement, basically, the world over, that there is potential of AI to transform every aspect of people's lives and challenging journalism practice as we know it. But mostly this is happening in the developing world. And therefore, our objectives basically are to examine use and adoption of AI in selected newsrooms in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is in Southern Africa. We also want to look at the extent of the use of AI in the gathering, packaging, and distribution of information. And finally, the factors affecting the adoption and use of AI journalism in Zimbabwe. In the method, we used in-depth interviews with 25 journalists. In Zimbabwe, there is a concept of what people call online journalists. So wanted to find out what these online journalists are doing online. Are they using AI journalism? And we looked at daily and weekly newspapers, both from the private and state-controlled media in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, media is divided basically into two. There is the privately owned and the state-controlled media. And we also looked at online news and freelance journalists, a phenomenon that is gathering momentum in Zimbabwe because of the restrictive environment. So online news sites are mushrooming in Zimbabwe, and we thought it wise to have a look at them. And therefore, what is AI? We wanted to adopt a definition that suits what we are describing. And we say it is a form of journalism that has emerged in the digital world. Basically, here we're looking at the use of computer-generated stories that incorporate, for example, that data journalism. Big media like BBC, for example, they use as we heard from the BBC, from someone from the BBC earlier on, they are using AI-enabled technologies, for example, in tracking, breaking news stories, in news verification. And the question is the use of AI journalism the world over the same in the global south, in Zimbabwe in particular? One might ask why interest in the global south, why interest in Zimbabwe? It's because countries like Zimbabwe are low-income economies, and there is a polarized media environment. By polarized media environment, I mean the media is divided into two poles, as I alluded to earlier. The media that is supporting the government and the media that is not supporting the government. So we want to find out how that then affects the use of artificial intelligence. There is also a realization that African media institutions have started using artificial intelligence, especially in strong economies like South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya, for example. And these have started in the incorporation of audience metrics for purposes like attracting advertising, informing structural changes, and also comparing their performances against competitors. So basically, they use AI for detecting, extracting, and verifying stories that have got something to do with data, especially. And in terms of, we are also of the realization under the context that there are issues of poverty, and therefore how then do those low or less powerful economies affecting the adoption and use of artificial intelligence generally. Theoretically, we looked at sociology of news with the argument that focusing on how information is gathered and processed. The theory is here that there are general pressures or forces that are involved in the production of news, and therefore technological advancements, for example, are like artificial intelligence, are an external force, and they can also affect the way journalism is practiced. As a result, journalism is no longer based on tip-offs or whistleblowers, but rather journalists have become proactive in the use of algorithms to enable them to get better stories, especially with regard to the investigative stories. And what did we find out from our interviews with journalists? We found that some journalists in Zimbabwe understand and use artificial intelligence journalism. That is, they use computer-generated stories. They use computer-generated data in their day-to-day activities. And this is more specifically with online news sites as opposed to the traditional news, especially newspapers, television, or in any case, there's only one television station so far. So the use of AI journalism is more profound with online news sites, especially 263 Chat, another one called Site, and a new one called Newsbox. They make use of infographics more regularly, and they also use Google Analytics in their stories. And then we also find out that those from state-owned news organizations do not necessarily use artificial intelligence, even though they understand it. And the reasons we will explain them later when we look at factors that are hindering the adoption of AI journalism in Zimbabwe. Therefore, what we also find out is that artificial intelligence can actually aid to the quality of journalism. So those journalists who are using artificial intelligence, especially online sites, see an improvement in the quality of journalism. And where exactly they see that in improvement, they see it in accuracy and also fact checking. It is now easy to fact check using some software and so on, to fact check stories and also fact check pictures, fact check videos, and therefore artificial intelligence is aiding in that. And further, artificial intelligence enhances their journalistic professional work. That is, gatekeeping has been reduced to a considerable extent, precisely because of computer-aided reporting. And also, journalists are of the view that information gathered through artificial intelligence can be used, especially in specialized reporting, such as health reporting. And a case in point here is the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a lot of information. There is actually information overload, and therefore artificial intelligence can help journalists aggregate huge sums of complicated data, for example, which can, and therefore it can assist them predict trends or even uncover certain facts by merely having accurate and current data available as events unfold. Therefore, that's lessening information overload and getting high content at less cost. And to show that AI or computational journalism is helping, or they are using it in Zimbabwe, some newsrooms, especially online online publications, they are now collaborating with non-governmental organizations, especially Transparency International, in writing corruption stories. That is Transparency International providing funds and also helping in computation of data, so as to look at corruption, especially in relation to the looting of COVID-19 funds. You know that developing countries got a lot of donations for COVID-19, and in Zimbabwe specifically, the Minister of Health was actually fired for polluting 60 million US dollars meant for COVID-19. And this was exposed by online sites working with the non-governmental organizations using computer generated stories. Having said that, some newsrooms use artificial intelligence and others do not use, especially those in the more traditional newspapers and television as we know them. What then are the factors that are hindering the use or adoption of artificial intelligence? I mean, the factors are macro and micro at the same time. And one of them is economic challenges. In non-performing economies, it's always difficult for companies to invest, because we need to invest in computers, you need to invest in the internet, you need to invest in in software as well. And there's generally fear of job losses. The elderly members of newsrooms, those who have been in the newsrooms in the 1980s, 90s, some of them fear that the adoption of artificial intelligence or computer generated stories will actually make them redundant and therefore lose their jobs. So that's why some newsrooms are not in favor of adopting artificial intelligence. There is also a digital gap. As I said, when economies are not performing, it's not easy for every newsroom to have computers and so on. And skills gap, lack of training, although at a university in Zimbabwe where I lecture, National University of Science and Technology, there is actually a plan to incorporate artificial intelligence in modules like media ethics and also investigative journalism, trying to find out after the Panama Papers how artificial intelligence can help in investigative journalism. There is also lack of resources, both human and technical, and also low internet connectivity as one of the factors that are affecting the uptake of or adoption of artificial intelligence. And then there's also institutional and structural challenges. That is the general lack of trust in machines. It's like how the old generation did not want to part with receiving letters as opposed to emails. It's the same. It's the same thing that is happening institutional. Some institutions feel to trust to invest in a program that can check trends or international and so on. It cannot be trusted. Why not use human beings? And then what are the arguments that we are drawing from this? We come up with three main arguments that adoption and use of artificial intelligence in Zimbabwe newsrooms is still at an early stage. Although it has changed in the way in which journalism conduct their duties, here in reference to those stories about COVID-19, where data revealed that some monies were looted. And also through the use of AI, news gathering processes have been improved and made easier, as they can quickly identify breaking news, trending issues, and also become aware of audience choices through audience metrics. The other argument that we make is that there have been shifts of power, roles, and responsibilities regarding new gatekeeper positions as a result of artificial intelligence in the journalism production process. I have alluded to that before, that because you can now verify a story on your own through the internet, through data that is provided, it's now easier and faster than having someone to check it for you. We are also of the view that one of the key ethical issues, which is objectivity, might be compromised in the use of artificial intelligence. And finally, we are saying that There is a steady but slow uptake of AI journalism in Zimbabwe, and we have already seen collaboration of non-governmental organizations and newsrooms in anti-corruption stories. However, there are cyber laws which punish publishing of falsehoods in Zimbabwe, and they make journalists therefore skeptical of computer-generated news, as one might, as as AI is also at risk of hacking, pegging, or falsehood, and therefore challenging the concept of objectivity. And if therefore people are punished or can be jailed for publishing falsehoods, as opposed to a mere retraction, it makes people skeptical of using, of adopting artificial intelligence. And responses from journalists also suggest that they view AI journalism as good, although there are some challenges as we have highlighted before. I thank you for my short presentation.